Okay, hello, welcome to the video on Pride and Prejudice. Once again, I must remind you, please do not plagiarize my video, or you will be taken to court for breaking the Polish law, and you will be prosecuted. Okay, Pride and Prejudice. I was absent for this lesson, so I can't promise that I'll know everything, but I'll try to do a quick breakdown of what happened, and at least mention what I do understand and know. So first of all, the most important thing we need to remember about this is it took place in the Regency era, and it's a Regency era romance book. So the Regency era, period towards the end of the Georgian era, where King George III was deemed unfit to rule due to his illness, and his son ruled as his proxy as Prince Regent. So it's around these years. 1811 to 1820, or 1795 to 1837, depending how you look at it. This is what it's characterized by if you take a look at the screen. So, lots of elegance, really extravagant things, being really eccentric. The most popular type of novel during this time was the domestic novel. So instead of presenting sensational things and gothic stuff like in the previous novels we looked at, like in the Mysteries of Udolpho, instead we have the stories of everyday life and of people getting married and having arguments in their family, etc. And this is what Pride and Prejudice is about. So before I get into that, let's have a look at Jane Austen. She's the novelist who wrote Pride and Prejudice. She's known for some of her other books like Emma and Sense and Sensibility, Mansfield Park, and I believe there's something else, but I don't remember. These are the most important ones. Okay. So, her book, Pride and Prejudice, it starts off with a famous line, one of the most famous in English literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. If I open up the questions from class, here we are. The first question, it's become one of the most famous in English literature. In addition to setting the narrative in motion, how does this line alert us of the tone of the novel and our role as readers in appreciating it? So, this sort of is quite an ironic line. It shows the sign of the times, what the times looked like during the Regency era. So, if men had cash, they wanted a pretty lady, and pretty ladies who didn't have much to offer, or at least according to those times didn't have much to offer, because feminism wasn't really profound back then, should be looking for husbands with lots of money so they don't suffer with poor people. Because we're really materialistic at these times. And the line sort of sets the whole story in motion because we have two characters, Elizabeth Bennet, represented by the stunning KEIRA Knightley, and Mr. Darcy, this ugly guy with sideburns. And Elizabeth Bennet has many sisters, and her mum really wants her to marry, and she wants her to marry to gain lots of money because they're not the richest family. And Mr. Darcy is really rich, but according to KEIRA Knightley, he's also a huge asshole, and at the beginning, she hates him. Her older sister Jane falls in love with his best friend, and she's like, Jane, your husband is so cool, but his friend is such a horrible guy. How could anyone love him? And that's what the novel is about. Okay, next question. The first novel was called First Impressions. Why is Pride and Prejudice better? Well, of course, their first impressions of each other weren't positive, as I just mentioned, but Pride and Prejudice is better because both of them are proud in their own ways and both of them are prejudiced towards each other. So at first they both think each other as just rubbish. Elizabeth thinks that Mr. Darcy is stuck up and he's rude and he's not really a gentleman, whereas Darcy thinks that Elizabeth is like young, rowdy and poor, so they don't really pay much attention to each other. And they're both proud because Elizabeth, at one point in the novel, she has an opportunity to marry a guy called Mr. Collins, and she says no because she doesn't love him, which was maybe not well accepted during the times that she lived in, because Mr. Collins had money. Her mum would have been really happy for her to marry Mr. Collins, but she placed more importance on her emotions, which does make her a strong feminine character for the times, while also being really stubborn. And Darcy is proud because, well, he's stuck up, as I said earlier. Several letters are reproduced in full in the text. What is the effect on a reader? I read this book, and And I'm sure the effect Jane Austen wanted to achieve was to make the reader feel more immersed in the book, to provide better immersion, to make you feel as if you were sort of snooping in on private conversations and to better understand feelings. Also maybe for slight elements of comic relief at times when you see how certain characters are dumber or what priorities they have in life. So I'm assuming it's that. But, I mean, for me, they were quite boring, but don't write that on a test. How are Elizabeth's written intelligence and independence first made clear in the novel? In what ways during the course of the novel is she the victim of her own intellect? I think the main one is denying marriage. Denying the marriage to Mr. Collins. Also, the first time that Mr. Darcy proposes to her, she also denies him, because they meet in his place here, Pemberley, and it's really beautiful and everything. And he's like, Elizabeth, marry me, I actually really like you, and you're not such a stupid brat as I thought earlier. And Elizabeth says, no, because I think you're a really sucky guy. And only later on, where she learns more about him and learns how he actually is quite good, deep inside, does she agree to marry him. So I think sometimes she's maybe too proud and too confident in herself. Although, why should we critique that? Who doesn't love a strong woman? Next up, for much of the novel, Austen seems to be offering a fairly pointed critique of marrying for social considerations. However, both marriages at the end, so both Jane and Elizabeth end up marrying up, which means they marry richer guys and get more cash than they had at the beginning. Does this undermine the critique the book offers? So I didn't really know the answer to this, so I searched up an article and there's pretty much the exact question. And someone says, in my opinion, both Jane and Elizabeth marry for love. The fact that their husbands are from a higher social class has nothing to do with their reasons for marrying. If anything, the social constructs are a barrier. And upon deeper consideration, I believe that I agree with this statement. I think the differences in social class actually made them more alien towards each other. They were part of the prejudice that they felt towards each other at the beginning. So it certainly was not like Elizabeth saying, yes, Mama, I will marry Mr. Darcy because he's richer than Mr. Collins. It was more so, I don't care about the money, I would marry him even if he was a poor beggar, because Mr. Darcy is so hot and I love his sideburns. I'm sorry, KEIRA Knightley, how could you say that? How could you think that when you look like this? Okay, further on. The happy union between Darcy and Elizabeth is ultimately... Okay, I don't know this, I'm sorry. And Pride and Prejudice is a novel largely about love and relationships, but without any depictions of passion, i.e. no sex scenes. Do you think the novel's chasteness is more a reflection of the way people lived in that time and place, or a reflection of what was acceptable in literature? Or something specific to Jane? I'm not sure, but I think it made the novel more accessible. I mean, I'm sure that in the 19th century, not everyone was mentally ready to read about sex and to read about like such close meetings between Darcy and Elizabeth. I think that's more a sign of our times, and I think it gives the novel a more romantic feel, because you can tell it's more about the feelings they have towards each other, not the lust they feel, because I mean, who would find this guy attractive in any way? And is it specific to Jane Austen? I'm not sure, because I haven't read any other Regency romances. I'm assuming it's more of a tool used to make the novel more romantic and seem more deep. And I think that's everything. That's all I had to say, and I hope this helped. And I'm also sorry, because as I said, I didn't attend the lesson. So, bye bye, and don't plagiarize this video.